Hey, fellow ADHDers, do you remember when you first found out you had ADHD? Whether formally diagnosed or you just knew in your soul, knew to yourself you had it. Do you remember how it felt? Did it actually feel like anything? Or did it take days, weeks, months, years to actually realize what that meant, how it manifested, and what it was going to mean for the rest of your life? Because that's kind of the way it was for me. I'm Shane Gallagher, an ADHD money coach and the host of ADHDollars, the podcast where we help ADHDers come together as a community, have a healthier relationship with money, and with any luck, get wealthier in the process. In this episode, I'm going to share what I'm calling my origin story. Um, really, the story of how I came to get diagnosed with ADHD, how I came to realize its impact on money, and start this podcast essentially. So let's get into it. So, to walk through this origin story, I'm going to start with ADHD, and then the money element will kind of come later. So, I was diagnosed with ADHD quite young. I was in kindergarten and I went to a private kindergarten because the daycare I had been going to since both my parents worked full time went up to kindergarten. So instead of separating all the kids, most of us finished off kindergarten and then jumped into the public school system at first grade. I also don't actually know if my school had full day kindergarten at the time, um, the local public school. So again, kindergarten, you're very young, right? You're aware of your world, which is maybe this much of the larger world that's going on. So I didn't really know that much was going on. I knew that I was more active and more hyper than a lot of others. Nap time never really existed for me. It didn't happen. Those are kind of the key things I remember. And then at one point, I went to a doctor who said I needed to see a psychiatrist. Again, wasn't aware of all that at the time. To me, it was just going to see another doctor. But, in hindsight, I know what it means. And so I went and met with a child psychologist. All I remember from that was playing with some blocks and some toys as she observed me and she asked me some questions. And then after that, I went back to the original doctor, and that's when I was prescribed Ritalin and started taking Ritalin. So from that point forward, every day I was taking medicine in the morning and at lunchtime, and that was that. The next real memory I have of it is later on, a little bit after that happened. Um, it's the first time I really remember some of the more anger and kind of frustration elements of the ADHD coming out. Interactions would happen, and I would go into what can only be described as, I guess, tantrum tantrums. The reason I hate using that term is because with what I know now of ADHD, it's not a tantrum tantrum. It's not the same thing as when kids are just going through their normal, um, maturation and development of the brain and dealing with all of that. It's not the same thing. It's very different for someone with ADHD. And at that age, there is, in my opinion, absolutely zero ability for you to control that because you don't even understand what's happening. Like at this point, I don't even know that I knew the phrase ADHD. Like I knew the letters, but I didn't have any idea what it meant. I took medicine. There was other kids that took medicine. People sometimes take medicine, but not all people. That's the level at which I really comprehended it at that age. But there was several interactions with the staff, and they triggered me, and then I have a tantrum tantrum. So, I I'm not listening. And sometimes I'm like grabbing things. One time someone's like art project got ripped. Um, I think one time I threw some Legos, um, and their response was to treat it as if I'm a misbehaving child. And again, this was after I was diagnosed with a medical condition. So every time it happened, they punished me. And, looking back on that, that was awful. Like, you got punished for something that just happened. Like, these events would happen. And yes, I was there, but it didn't feel like I was actually in control of or enacting it. And then after it happened and the calm starts to restore, it's almost like my brain was replaying a sequence of events that I didn't remember. The closest thing I can compare it to would be someone who sleepwalks and they have security cameras or video cameras in their house and watches the next morning as they went to, I don't know, the common example of the fridge and ate some food. They don't remember doing any of that and they weren't controlling any of it. That's very much how it felt and what it felt like. And so it's okay, there's an interaction. I get frustrated and angry. Things happen that I really am not in control of. And then I end up in timeout and in trouble. So that was very challenging as a child who did not understand what was going on, right? Um, and I think today as an adult, it's even more upsetting when I now understand that these people were treating me like this when I had a formal medical diagnosis that back then, yes, it was a medical diagnosis, but it wasn't recognized as formally and covered, I'd say, as fully under the ADA, American with Disabilities Act, as it is today, right? There wasn't that notion. And this was still the era of if a child misbehaves, they need discipline to get straightened out. And to a certain extent, the children do need something to structure them, benefit negative responses to train appropriate behaviors, right? All animals do. We observe that. But there wasn't this recognition of disciplining someone who can't actually control what they're doing has no positive effect. Anyway, I digress a little, but that kind of went on. In the interim, I'm going back to the doctor every so many months. I wasn't fully aware at the time, but I noticed that, okay, it went from the pill being this big because it was a quarter of a pill to the pill being this big because it was half the pill. My medicine dosage was being increased. Which again, if you think about today, basically means the approach was, oh, let's medicate him more to see if we get the desired behavior. Which not sure how I feel about that, but I'll get to in a minute. Overall, my view on how the medicine helped me as a kid, and I do think in net it was helpful. But the daycare that I went to decided that I needed to be separated from other children. I was a child, I wasn't involved in the discussion, but I'm assuming the argument was their safety, even though at no point did I ever touch a person. Ever, not even close. Like, that wasn't a thing. So, yeah, I flew some Legos. I grabbed an art project off a wall. There was never an incident anywhere even close to me touching someone. Like, that wasn't a thing. But whatever. I personally, looking back on it, think it had nothing to do with that. I think this daycare very much had this disciplined mindset in their mind or whatever. But anyway, that's what started to happen. So basically, I'm in the same room with all of these kids. But if there was two sections to the room. There was the more seated, I'll call it study traditional school area, and then there was the play area. If they were in the play area, I had to be seated in the other area. Right? If they were in that area, I had to be in the play area. So basically, I was separated or segregated out from, we'll call it the general kindergarten population. And I don't remember that bothering me. I mean, I won't say I was cool with it, but I don't remember there being this like, oh, this is an injustice, this is absurd. The way that it probably would feel today with the additional knowledge and information that I have about what was actually going on with me and how that is. And if you know anything about ADHD, separating ADHD child out like that is actually probably one of the worst things you can do because they're no longer within the normal environment and given a chance to operate in a normal social environment to learn, adapt, and not accommodate, but start to associate with that environment to develop the appropriate coping skills, right? To manage their disease within that environment. So it's very detrimental. Um, Anyhow, so that all finished off, and then I went into first grade, and for all intensive purposes, 90% of the time it was night and day. I was ridiculously studious, probably overly so, overly obsessed with again, whatever types of grades you actually get in the first grade. And I think back then it was more traditional to grading than today's a little more generic kind of thing until you hit the higher grades. But anyway, I was like a model student. I think maybe there was one incident where I kind of got angry and I was put on a timeout, maybe at most three, but for all intents and purposes, most people were not aware, or the other kids, that there was anything. Not like at daycare where I had been kind of separated out from the general population. So overall, it was quite positive. My dosage of medicine had continued to increase, which again, you're growing, you're getting bigger. Some of that's totally to be expected. Every day after lunch, I went to the nurse's office. I was given my pill. I took my pill, and things went really well. And that really continued through most of my education. Again, each year there might be a mild event here, a mild event there. As I started to get into fifth grade, I started to become aware of my IEP. And I don't know, honestly, at this point in time, if I had an IEP starting at first grade or if it only came into play at fifth grade, or that's only when I became aware of it. But the reason I became aware of it is my school had two different programs for fifth grade. They had the more traditional, you're with one teacher, you sit there all day and do that. And they had one where there was three teachers that traded the students at different parts in the day, more similar to what you would experience in middle school and ultimately high school. Um, and we really wanted me in the rotational program because if you know ADHD, us sitting in the same chair for 8 hours or how many hours you're in class is horrendous. And it became a fight with them basically saying, well, we can't really accommodate your IEP in that program. And I don't know the exact conversations, but I'm assuming it went along the lines of what I just said, explaining that actually that program better accommodates the IEP. Now, one of the problems I came to realize much, much later is the IEP was woefully inadequate in terms of what was written in it and what really happens with ADHD. But that's a larger societal problem that honestly will need its own episode to unpack. But in short, ADHD is viewed by society as an inability to focus and you being overly hyper. That's not really what it is. Those are symptoms of it, but there's actually a lot more of a fundamental thing to ADHD that really has nothing to do with that and has many, many other symptoms that are actually, in my opinion, much more challenging and difficult than the hyperactivity and the inability to focus. So that happened in fifth grade. Ultimately, I did get into where I wanted. Sixth grade, we now enter a system where the class you're in is based on what level you were performing at, or so it's supposed to be. So, for example, when it came to math, there was three different levels. There was at grade level, below grade level, and above grade level. I think we called it LEAP. But because I had an IEP, the standard um, operating procedure at the time, we'll call it, was everyone with an IEP goes into below level, even though all of my standardized test scores put me at level for math. So I get my course assignment and it has me below level. And again, it doesn't say below level on it, but it said something where we knew what that meant. And this started off a multiple phone call. I think there was a meeting at one point back and forth with my mom in the district to basically be like, no, there's no reason to put him in this. And it didn't make any sense. Because if you also looked at other kids that had IEPs that were put in there, they were for conditions that automatically had a much more direct disruptive connection to education, like dyslexia or things of that nature. Again, things that you totally can manage and move up on, which actually dyslexia is probably a bad example with math, but they did the same thing for your English. They had 3 levels to it. But anyway, it became a back and forth. And ultimately, we did get me placed in the mid-level. Well, look at what happens by the time I leave high school. I am in honors history, honors English, AP computer science, which again, computer science is very math driven. So like I can perform, I can do these things. I was extremely studious. Again, as I've said several times, probably overly studious, overly obsessed with my grades, all of that kind of thing. Everything went really well. I get out into the working world, everything goes well. And I think the only thing that really changed with me and my ADHD is at 8th grade, I stopped taking medication. And for anyone listening to this that's not an ADHDer, one of the things you have to understand is there is no test to determine how well the medication is working. So they can test and see how much of it's in your bloodstream, but that has no bearing on how well it's actually helping. It's all you having to be self-aware of what's happening and how you're feeling, which is already something ADHDers are not good at. So it's very challenging. But I stopped in 8th grade, didn't feel like I needed it. And then again, through all of high school, was not on any medication and ended in honors English, math, AP Comp Sci. So did very well with it, did very well all through college. I think it's only later within adulthood, post-college, even probably 5, 6 years after that, I started to become a lot more aware of the impact ADHD was having in my life. And particularly in the context of this podcast, how it was impacting my money. And what I would notice is these cycles where I became super obsessed, hyper focused on my money and would save up a bunch of money, right? And then I would reach this point where I was exhausted from always looking at my money, from every time I went to a restaurant, recording in, I was using Mint a lot at the time. Like if I paid cash instead of using card, which I've always been very card heavy, recording where things went, looking at budgets, I would just become exhausted from it. And then I would not focus on it. I wouldn't want to look at it at all. Like, don't show it to me. I just want to go about my life. And then, my money would go in a different direction, right? Suddenly I'd have multiple trips where I bought a lot of clothes because I went to the mall back when they were really still a thing, just for something to do, right? Now, I didn't in that period ever end up in like a lot of debt or anything like that, but things weren't always where I wanted them. So things did go very well for me financially, partially because I did research and planning, partially luck. Again, so I graduated college in 2010. In that time period, it was cheaper to buy a home in my area than to rent. So the big difference was the ability to have a down payment, which I was able to do because I had worked all throughout college and saved money. But again, this is when I really started to become aware of money and everything. So I don't generally fall into impulsive spending in the sense that add to cart, add to cart, add to cart. Next thing you know, I've had 25 $50 transactions that are adding up to $1,000+ My math might be off there, but you get the picture. I am big on experiences. I love to travel, and when I travel, I like nice hotels. So I fall a little more into the trap of, okay, we did plan for a vacation. We're going to go on the vacation. That's all good. But potentially being a little impulsive with where I push that budget to. And then sometimes after vacation, have a little bit of after expense or post vacation debt to kind of pay down or address. So that's a little bit more my impulsiveness than add to cart, add to cart, add to cart. That's just not how it manifests in me. With all that said, I've done fairly well financially. At one point, I had three um, 3 to 4 unit apartment buildings that I was rented out. I did liquidate them post COVID just because the real estate market had gone up enough that it financially made sense to cash out. And renting also just became a little bit more challenging. So I've had 8 to 10 mortgages in my life. I've had a lot of experience with that. I've had personal mortgages. I've had commercial mortgages. Additionally, I've been married, did the whole expensive wedding, expensive honeymoon. Um, Unfortunately, my first marriage did not last, so ultimately got divorced, dealt with all of the kind of aftermath financial from that. And I think that's the first point I had some true ADHD impulsive spending. Cobble that with post divorce, screw life, I'm going to spend some money. And I bought a bigger house after my divorce, not because that was the goal, not because it was kind of like an FU kind of thing, anything like that. The divorce was not initiated by me, but ultimately like amicable. Um, no really hard feelings there towards him, but just annoyed with the situation, kind of more situation, that ADHD thing where we take something and make it ours and a failure that it's really not, the guilt with it. That's the bigger thing from it. But after that was a bit of a different era in my finances. I wanted the house to look nice. So I got some nice furniture, all these things, got into a bit of debt there, paid it off. And then got into a little bit of debt during COVID, partially because I started seeing my now husband, and like we were just kind of doing a lot of things. We were ordering out a lot, like not crazy things, but we were ordering out a lot, Uber Eats, all of that, which starts to add up over time. And then I kind of impulsively, yeah, I guess you'd have to call it impulsively, bought a um, fractional ownership in Cabo, Mexico, during COVID. And it wasn't, I don't think you can adequately, like I'll jokingly say, well, we didn't know where the world was going to go. No, it was an impulsive purchase. I don't regret it. It has paid off, but that put a little bit of debt and strain on for a period of time. So as I said, the good thing is my impulsive isn't like this constant add to cart, buy. I can't stop myself. The bad thing is when I do it, there's a few more zeros on the end of the equation, right? So anyway, with this, more recently, in the last year or two, I've really come to recognize when ADHD is having an impact in my life and what ADHD really means through some videos, through some books, all of that stuff. And as I started to look out there and say, where are other people talking about this? Like I'm a money geek. I'm a business nerd. I always have been. And I don't say those as negatives. I say those as badges of honor. And I'm perfectly happy with who I am, being a business geek and a money nerd. The thing is, those are not topics that your friends want to talk about when you go out for drinks. So I've always kind of had a thirst to find other people I could talk about this with. And when I started to realize the impact ADHD had on personal finance, on money, and the lack of like solid communities and resources out there focusing on that space. Ton of stuff on ADHD, but on that niche, I realized there was an opportunity for me to go out there and find a community of people that I could talk to about money, about ADHD, about the intersection of it. So that's why I've started this podcast, ADHDollars. Again, we are really focused here on building a community where we all can help each other have a less stressful, healthier relationship with money that ultimately, hopefully, leads to all of us being more financially successful. And what that means to each of us will be different. But with that, weekly podcasts, we're going to focus on ADHD, what that means, how that intersects with money. And then we're also going to focus on just general money management tips. Our society does not do a great job of teaching people about money, loans, savings, insurance, investing. But yet, we now force you to invest as part of your healthcare with HSAs, as part of education with TAP 529 programs, in order to handle retirement. Social Security is not designed to, and never was, replace 100% of your pre-retirement income. So you do have to invest there. So we're going to cover all of these things in this podcast. My goal is to keep these episodes to digestible lengths, ideally in most cases 15 to 20, 25 minutes. This one might go just a little bit longer as I'm covering 37 years of time. But I am very excited to be doing this. As you probably figured it out, I am a talker. I do like to talk. So I will do my best to stick to those time limits and stop the ADHD from sending me off on tangents, unless I think the tangent is educational and useful. But with that, welcome to ADHDollars. I'm so excited to have you here. Please do subscribe, follow, whatever the button says on your preferred podcasting platform. If you would like to see this in video format, it will be available on Spotify and YouTube in video format. All other podcast platforms are audio only, so it will be syndicated out in audio format. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.